Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia channel. The book that this program interprets for you is Upstream, The Quest to Solve Problems Before They Happen, which is the work of the well-known American writer Dan Heath. In this book, Dan Heath uses a lot of the case studies, hopefully, convince us to shift more of our efforts upstream. Because whether it is in personal life, organizational management, or national development, we should not just stay at the palliative stage and passively deal with problems again and again, but should really seek to solve the root cause, and only by changing the rules can we really change the situation. So, what factors lead us to be more prone to reactive rather than proactive intervention? What are the difficulties in taking upstream action? What should we do to master upstream thinking? After listening to this episode, you will know the answer. What is upstream thinking? The book tells a story. Two people were walking on the road when they suddenly heard someone shouting for help from the river under the bridge. They saw a child who was about to drown, so they jumped into the water and started the rescue. After finally saving the child ashore, strange things happened. Another child called for help from the river, and they had to jump back into the river to save others. One child after another drowned, and they were both exhausted. At this moment, one of them got ashore and walked away. His companion was very surprised and thought, "No one can be saved, where are you going?" "I'm going to go upriver and find out who threw these kids into the water," he said. When the story comes to this point, if you think about it carefully, you will find that in this story, one person is desperately saving people in the river, while the other person is going upstream to find the reason. Behind the two different solutions, it actually represents people with two different ways of thinking in life. The first is downstream thinking. This person has been in the downstream for a long time, encountering problems and solving problems, and some urgent things may be able to cope once, but if he lives in this way for a long time, his energy will be consumed rapidly. The final result can be imagined: every time I am very passive, tired of coping, and often treat the symptoms but not the root cause. The opposite is a person with upstream thinking. Upstream thinking is a way of thinking that prevents problems before they happen and takes precautions. If you can predict problems in advance and take the initiative to attack, of course life will be much easier. But having said that, who doesn't want to be able to have upstream thinking? But the reality is that only a small number of people actually do it. A teacher once said, "Ordinary people change the result, excellent people change the reason, and top experts change the model." Just like the subtitle of this book, Master Thinking from Passive to Active. If you want to change the state of mediocrity, change the passive situation in your life, and become a master of active thinking, this book can bring you some inspiration. The author of this book is Dan Heath, who once worked as a researcher at Harvard Business School and is now studying management at Duke University in the United States. Many people may not be unfamiliar with the name Dan Heath. He also has an older brother named Chip Heath. Both brothers are organizational behaviorists and have co-authored many best-selling books, such as Determination and Blink, Change, Powerful Moments, etc. But in this Upstream, Dan Heath did not mention many difficult theories, but through a large number of case studies, hoping to convince us to shift more energy to upstream. Because whether it is in personal life, organizational management, or national development, we should not just stay at the palliative stage and passively deal with problems again and again, but should really seek to solve the root cause, and only by changing the rules can we really change the situation. Next, it is divided into two parts to interpret. First part. What factors hinder us from taking upstream actions and are more inclined to respond reactively? In this book, the author summarizes 3 situations that often appear in life, which make us indulge in downstream actions, but forget that we can go upstream. If you want to sum up the first situation in one sentence, it is called, "I can't deal with that problem now." Imagine a person who has been saving people in the river for a long time. If you tell him, "Don't save people, go upstream to see what happened," he will probably say to you, "Wait, the situation on the side is very urgent, and I can't get away for the time being." This is the status quo of most people, because there are too many urgent facts in work and life. For example, today is the last day to submit a proposal. For example, I will suddenly have to receive a client looking for a repairman, and so on. Numerous psychological studies have shown that focusing on immediate urgent matters is the default function of people's thinking. But the point, the authors say, is that when people are overwhelmed with many problems, they stop trying to solve all of them. Their vision becomes narrow, lacking long-term planning and strategic prioritization of everything. As a result, what is most urgent is naturally the first thing to do. Over time, they fall into a short-term, reactive thinking trap. In the book, the author also vividly calls this situation tunnel vision. It's like confining a person's thinking in a long, long tunnel. The only way forward is to go forward. It is difficult for them to stop and think. Is there any other way out of the tunnel? What is really important to me? Downstream actions are all urgent and urgent, while upstream actions are important and not urgent. Correspondingly, this naturally creates an impression on people. Downstream actions can be started immediately, and you can get timely feedback after solving them, and you will have a sense of accomplishment, while upstream actions are arduous, requiring you to have the patience to settle down and work hard. For example, the author mentioned in the book that in 2009, he had exchanges with a deputy chief of the Canadian Police. In the opinion of the deputy director, many police officers are immersed in the role setting of cops and robbers. It is much easier to say that I have arrested a criminal suspect than to say that I have persuaded a child to take drugs. For example, there are two policemen. A police officer spends half his time on duty in an area with a high incidence of accidents. Because the driver sees that he is on duty, he will drive more carefully, which may reduce vehicle violations and prevent accidents to a certain extent. The other policeman was hiding around the corner and specially issued tickets for vehicles that violated traffic rules. Who would you say is more productive? The deputy director replied, obviously, the former policeman made more outstanding contributions in maintaining public safety, but the fact is that only the latter policeman will be commended, because he has a lot of tickets in his hand to prove that the effort he put in. You see, work rules reward those who solve urgent problems, and a person who is always solving urgent problems and gaining a small sense of accomplishment has no time or intention to change the passive situation. What most of us don't realize is that saying, "I can't deal with that right now," usually means that you still won't have time to deal with that problem later. It's a bit sad to say that, but it's true. All kinds of urgent things will crowd out the things that are really important to you, and this is the harm. Next, let's look at the second situation, which can also be summed up in one sentence: this is not a problem. Going back to the story at the beginning, children's cries for help often come from this river. Then, as more and more people join the rescue team, the person we mentioned earlier has become a master. If you ask him now, why do children always drown in this river? He may turn his head and say to you helplessly, this river is fast flowing, and it has been like this all year round, and there is nothing unusual about it. This is the power of habit mentioned by the author in the book. For example, if you walk into a room, you may immediately notice the hum of the air conditioner, but after staying in it for 5 minutes, you will gradually lose the sound of the air conditioner and feel that everything is normal. Similarly, if we have been in some unreasonable rules for a long time, you may feel strange at first, but over time, you will get used to its existence, and you don't even feel that it is still a problem, let alone think about it. Take a look upstream. Marcus Elliott, a doctor and sports coach, saw exactly this when he joined a football team in 1999. Many people believe that rugby itself is a difficult sport, and player injuries are inevitable, so no one is surprised that many players on the team have tendon injuries. Some people even think that only when you are injured can you work hard. If you are not injured, it may mean that you did not work hard. But Elliott doesn't think so. He believes that most of the injuries are caused by improper training. Therefore, during the training process, he will carefully study each athlete, conduct strength tests on them, and customize the training plan. Moreover, based on existing data, he will focus on players who are more prone to tendon injuries. Of course, in the process of Elliott changing the training plan, the resistance is also relatively large. However, under the leadership of Elliott, the team's injury accidents were reduced from 22 times to only 3 times, and better results were achieved in the game. Elliott also later founded a sports company that specializes in evaluating and training elite athletes. More than half of the players in the National Basketball Association and NBA have received Elliott's motion analysis, and the science of injury prevention is becoming more and more popular in professional sports. For another example, in 1998, if you were a high school student studying in a public school in Chicago, the probability of you graduating successfully was about 52.4% of the probability of flipping a coin. What is the concept of 52.4%? It is equivalent to that in the entire huge system of public schools. About 190,000 students out of more than 360,000 students cannot graduate, and then either go to the society or become unemployed. This was the state of education in Chicago at the time. When the author interviewed a middle school principal, she said helplessly, basically, for a long time, people have had a concept that after a child goes to high school, there are only two outcomes: to get ahead or to be a mess. For these kids, high school is the final word, and if they don't graduate, it's their own fault. No one will question this. You see, people who have been in an unreasonable environment or rules for a long time will become accustomed and unable to perceive the problem. Speaking of which, we have finished the first two situations. The first is called "I can't deal with that problem now," the second is "It's not a problem," and the last situation mentioned by the author in the book is called "It's not my problem, what do you mean?" Let's go back to the scene of saving people in the river mentioned above. The person who went upstream was lucky enough to find out why the child drowned. But how to act? The reality is often that the problem is more complicated and difficult to deal with, or after thinking about it, he evaluates the problem, and it seems that it is not my turn to solve it. In the end, the upstream action is at a standstill, and the current situation of the child drowning remains unchanged. You know, the difficulty with upstream action is that it is completely voluntary, not mandatory. Generally speaking, if there is a problem in the downstream action, the responsibility is very clear, but the more you go upstream, the more people are involved, the wider the scope of the problem, and basically there is no clear person responsible. This leads to the fact that even though many people have the ability to solve the problem, they are unwilling to take action because of various reasons such as avoiding risks or fear of taking responsibility, or believing that they are not qualified. For example, when it comes to increasing the graduation rate of high school students in public schools in Chicago, many people think that they are just a high school teacher or principal, not to say that they have the ability to change the entire education system, but just to understand many children. Even with their family situation, they are also unable to do what they want. Another example is Yikang, a global online travel website. They also encountered such a trouble in 2012. When the person in charge of the customer experience team checked the data, he found that there was a very unreasonable data. For those customers who booked air tickets, hotels, or car rental services on the website, basically 58 out of every 100 people would have called the customer service hotline for assistance. We all know that the biggest attraction of online travel websites is that you can directly complete a series of operations such as booking, purchase, or payment online, without having to make long phone calls and communicate back and forth as before, which is particularly troublesome. How did this problem happen? After some research, they found that there were about 20 million calls, and the main reason was that customers asked for itineraries. If support costs are calculated at around $5 per call, that translates to a total cost of $100 million for this issue alone. So why can't the customer automatically receive the itinerary? The reason is also very simple: either the customer entered the wrong email address, or the itinerary was sent to the spam folder, or the customer himself mistakenly deleted the itinerary as spam. What's more terrible is that the customer has no way to retrieve the itinerary through the website, so he has to call the customer service number. In response to this situation, Yikang quickly arranged a team to deploy a corresponding solution. Since 2012, the proportion of customers calling customer service has dropped from 58% to about 15%, which has achieved good results. However, compared to this result, people are more curious about why Yikexing is a big company after all. Why did it realize this problem only after 20 million calls, such as when the millionth or 100,000th call is recorded? Why hasn't it been taken seriously? The reason is exactly what we said about the third case: it's not my problem. Like most companies, Yikexing divides employees into different teams, each with its own focus. For example, the marketing team is responsible for attracting customers to their website. The product team is responsible for convincing customers to complete online reservations. The technical team is responsible for maintaining the smooth operation of website functions. Solution. During this process, there was no team whose job it was to make sure customers didn't have to call for help. In fact, when the problem first appeared, every team actually noticed it, but no one person or a team thought, "This is my problem." So, if no one volunteers to take up this upstream work, then the underlying problem won't be fixed. The difficulty of upstream action is that it not only requires us to have the wisdom to go upstream and change the rules, but also requires us to have the determination and courage to take responsibility. The above is the content of the first part. To sum up, there are 3 obstacles that prevent us from taking upstream actions. First, indulging in solving all kinds of urgent problems, looking every day, you pay attention, just looking very busy and having no time. Second, because of habits or rigid thinking, can't see the problem. Finally, it's a lack of willingness to take responsibility or the initiative to take a step forward. The second part. Fortunately, recognizing the obstacles themselves means we can avoid these pitfalls and start moving upstream. If, like me, you are mentally prepared to change this passive situation, then let's talk about what we should do in order to master upstream thinking. There are many specific strategies. The author gives 7 methods in detail in the book. They are, to unite the right people, to have the awareness of changing the system, to find the focus and breakthrough, to find problems in advance, and to set indicators to measure success, anticipate possible related problems in advance and find sources of funds. I have summarized 2 of them for you. The most important one is the method that is closest to our work and life, and it is also the method that the author himself expounded in a lot of space. The first method is to find the signal in advance and actively intervene. Mastering upstream thinking means that before a problem occurs, we can realize that there is still a lot we can do. It is not necessarily possible to avoid the occurrence of the problem from the root cause, but at least it can reduce the probability of the occurrence of the problem. We can go upstream to find the best intervention point for the problem and buy time for subsequent actions. For example, as we mentioned earlier, Elliot, as the doctor and sports coach of the rugby team, in order to reduce the probability of athletes' injuries as much as possible, the risk signal he found was the muscle stress of athletes. In the early days, when the technology of the sports industry was immature, Elliot mainly relied on observing the athletes' sprinting movements and mechanisms to analyze the imbalance points between their muscles, such as whether this tendon is different from another tendon. Be stronger. Later, as the technology developed, Elliot began using 3D stereoscopic motion capture to microscopically analyze athletes as they ran, jumped, and spun. This kind of analysis can get amazingly accurate results. For example, when Elliot analyzed an athlete, he usually noticed that when he landed after jumping, the force on one side of his body was 25% more than that on the other side. The femur is rotating medially, while the tibia is rotating laterally, so his relative rotation is too great and there is a high risk of knee injury. Then after a period of customized training, Elliot will reevaluate to see how much the problem has improved. In this case, the athlete's muscle stress was a valid risk signal. Another example is LinkedIn, a workplace recruitment website, which has launched a product specifically for recruiters. The product sold very well, but the churn rate was also high. The proportion of customers who do not renew is about 30%, which means that 3 out of 10 customers no longer use this product every year. At the beginning, the company's solution was to send special personnel to maintain communication with these customers who were at risk of loss. If the churn rate is high during this period, it is necessary to start an early warning. The focus of everyone's work is to find ways to retain customers. But Luali Sasaina, as the head of the department, pointed out that the real risk signal is not the churn rate, but the utilization rate of customers. Sakina led the team to conduct data analysis, and they realized that we can reasonably predict who will churn 30 days after the customer purchases the product. Why is this? Because Sasaina found that customers who used the product within the first 30 days were 5 times more likely to renew their LinkedIn service than the rest of the customers. That is to say, many customers have never used it after buying it. As long as they can guide customers to use it several times within 30 days, then this product can create great benefits. Just 2 years later, the company's revenue has indeed proved that the risk signal Sasaina found is correct. There are many similar cases. For example, in the case of high school students graduating from public schools in Chicago, as we mentioned earlier, the researchers found through research that there was no junior high school in Chicago. A child went from elementary school to 8th grade. Then you go to high school, which starts in 9th grade. As a result, many children choose to abandon themselves because they cannot adapt to the transition period. In the face of such a situation, the school's previous punishment method was to suspend them for 2 weeks. You know, for a student who was already on the verge of dropping out and struggling to keep up, this punishment was undoubtedly worse. However, now people have found 2 particularly effective risk signals. First, whether a student can complete the 5 credits of a full-year course. Second, whether a student can fail a core course such as mathematics or English without exceeding 1 semester. Based on these 2 valid risk signals, both schools and teachers changed the way they teach. In order to ensure that all students can successfully complete the course, the teachers even take the initiative to talk to the students to understand where they are unable to keep up with the progress, and consider how to arrange the course design more reasonably. The good news is that in 2018, thanks to a series of upstream measures and the efforts of everyone, the high school graduation rate of Chicago public schools increased from 52.4% to 78%. They have saved the future of tens of thousands of students. According to a rough estimate, the value of this reform is more than $10 billion, and this value is still growing. You see, this is the huge gain brought about by finding the signal in advance and actively intervening. Next, let's talk about the second method, which is to face up to the complexity of the system. In other words, in order to master upstream thinking, we have to learn to think about problems from the perspective of system changes in many cases. In the real world, on a timeline that can be extended almost infinitely, upstream is just a concept relative to downstream. For a problem, we can intervene at many time nodes. In other words, upstream is not a specific destination, but a general direction in which we go upstream. For example, compared to drowning, putting on a lifebuoy is an upstream solution, and learning to swim is a more upstream solution than putting on a lifebuoy. You can always push further upstream, but the further upstream, the larger the scope of the problem and the more complex the solution. Especially in some public domains, if you only consider a certain local problem and do not take into account the possible second-order effects in advance, it may happen that after dealing with the current problem, a new problem will be caused, or a new problem will appear. The A problem is to deal with the A problem, and then the B problem is dealt with when the B problem arises. This is to solve a certain local problem, but the connection causes another problem, which is the performance of lack of systematic thinking. For example, in order to protect the environment, in 2014, the Chicago city government passed a law prohibiting stores from providing disposable plastic bags. If we think in terms of system change, banning plastic bags, what are the potential second-order effects? What will replace single-use plastic bags? People may use more paper bags, carry reusable bags, or not use shopping bags. The author also presents the results of some academic research in the book, which objectively analyzes the impact of bags made of several different materials on the environment. If we consider production, transportation, actual use times, and other factors, it is actually difficult to say that I completely ban people from using disposable plastic bags. This policy is conducive to environmental protection. So in real life, how do these stores face the sudden ban? They started offering those thicker plastic bags at the checkout counter, presumably because customers would reuse those thicker plastic bags, which most customers wouldn't do, so it's even worse for the environment. What is puzzling is that in 2016, after the government discovered the problem, it banned the use of this thicker plastic bag. As a result, the sales of kitchen garbage bags began to soar again. And in the process, some people believe that the shortage of plastic bags catalyzed the spread of the epidemic. Because many homeless people are accustomed to using plastic bags to dispose of metabolic waste, but after the use of plastic bags is banned, other alternatives will not be so hygienic, which will lead to the spread of germs and affect public health. You see, the public policy behind a plastic bag involves many interests and is intricately designed. As the author says in the book, when it comes to upstream thinking, we are still just starting out. Therefore, in the method of facing the complexity of the system squarely, in addition to the need to predict the second-order effect in advance, the author also reminds us that we must learn to unite suitable people, find a point of strength or a breakthrough, and then cross the river by feeling the stones. necessary for solving complex problems. For the promulgation of a public policy and the formulation of a solution to an upstream problem, a small-scale pilot can be carried out first, and a little bit of discussion about which measures are feasible, which measures are not feasible, and which conditions need to be met. In 2017, the Chicago city government also discovered, after a little exploration, that stores can provide several options of paper bags and plastic bags, but each plastic bag needs to charge an additional tax of 7 cents, which is actually the most beneficial to the environment. Protected. Speaking of this, have you found out that the so-called facing up to the complexity of the system means that we need to spend more time thinking about the problem holistically, in a connected and dynamic way, not just limited to the specific problem that attracted us from the beginning? Now, I have introduced 2 specific methods for mastering upstream thinking: find signals in advance, actively intervene, and face up to the complexity of the system. However, the various upstream thinking cases we mentioned above are actually more or less related to organizations, such as schools, enterprises, and cities. If I just want to apply upstream thinking in my daily life, what should I do? Do it? The author mentioned at the end of this book that upstream thinking is neither profound nor complicated. There's a saying we've probably heard many times, but it's still true: the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is now. Even if we just think a little more than others at work, even if we just start some kind of action today, it means that we have established the consciousness of upstream thinking, and we are advancing upstream day by day. This is the end of Dan Heath's Upstream, the quest to solve problems before they happen. Do you have any different views on this? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.